The bogs and marshes of Newfoundland's Bell Island teem with legends, and a stretch of forest known as Dobbin's Garden and the adjacent Butler's Marsh are the home of the terrifying Bell Island hag and the even more vicious creatures known simply as fairies. As the story goes, in 1939, a young woman got lost in the woods of Dobbin's Garden. Those born and raised on the island feared that the legends were true and refused to enter the area after sunset. But she was a recent immigrant and was unaware of the stories. Some claim this innocent girl fell victim to the wrath of the fairies, who take vengeance on anyone they find passing through their forest. The fairies are malevolent creatures of Irish folklore, which dwell in forests and bogs. They are territorial beings with a deep and inexplicable hatred of humans. Those who enter their realm are rarely heard from again. The girl cried for help, praying that the townspeople would come to her aid. But they were too petrified to set foot in the forest, and no one came for her, except the angered fairies. The terrified young girl cursed those who refused to help her while she suffered her ordeal alone in the forest. Legend has it that after her death, she returned to haunt Dobbin's Garden as the vengeful Bell Island hag, still seeking retribution from anyone who dares enter the forest.
Newfoundlanders have embraced the legends of the Irish and made them a part of their culture. Nowhere is this truer than on Bell Island in Conception Bay. Tales of fairies and ghosts are a part of life, and the story that most embodies this is the legend of the Bell Island hag.
My name is Henry Crane, and I'm standing in front of Dobbin's Garden here on Bell Island. And one of the legends that are associated with Dobbin's Garden is concerning what's called the Bell Island hag. Basically, the hag was some kind of shrouded white creature that would come from the swamp at the bottom of Dobbin's Garden and overpower men. If a man were caught there alone, all by himself, in the evening at any given time, he would smell this awful stench. It was a fecus type rotting smell that would happen, and the men would become paralyzed with it. And beneath the cloak above her face, you would see a scabby, scarry, peeling skin, blank eyes, and as the face got closer, the men would pass out.
A man who had been trapped in Dobbin's Garden after dark was found the following day, staggering out of the woods, all the color drained from his face. A woman tried to calm him, but all he could remember was the overpowering stench and the horrible nightmarish face of whatever he had seen.
Now, where the legend came from, there's all kinds of stories. It was said that there was this young girl who died in the woods, and she was calling for help, and she died in the swamp. Nobody came to her help. They were afraid of what was called fairies, or the little people. And they would not go into the woods to help her, because nobody came to her aid. Whenever anybody was out in Dobbin's Garden, she would give them what it was like to die in the swamp, the taste, the smell, the stench, the stink, and for not helping her when her cries of help went unheard.
The hag is not the only terrifying creature on Bell Island. In the adjacent Butler's Marsh dwell the most feared creatures of all, the evil fairies.
Butler's Marsh has a lot of folklore associated when it comes to fairies. Now, Our fairies are our little people. Sometimes they're happy little people, but on Bell Island they were malevolent, evil little people.
Children growing up near Butler's Marsh are taught about fairies at a young age. Before they cross the marsh, their mothers place pages from the Bible in their pockets to ward off these creatures. They also carry pieces of homemade bread to appease any fairies who might be encountered. Only after taking these precautions does a mother feel her child is safe entering the marsh. If one of the fairies comes too close, the crumbs of bread are offered up as a token of respect.
There's quite a few instances of people having contact with our type of fairies.
A local miner had been missing for 3 days when he finally emerged from Butler's Marsh. He was physically and emotionally shattered, left only with vague memories of what had happened to him. One night after working late, he decided to take a shortcut home through Butler's Marsh. Almost immediately, he heard strange sounds around him. He knew he was not alone. Although he had grown up listening to the tales of Butler's Marsh, he was a rational man and never believed in the legends.
The man that came out of Butler's Marsh, when he went in, he disappeared for 3 days on a stretch of ground that's only about 150 feet. He was very simple-minded, he was very crippled up, and he was working in the mines he could never work again. And he thought he had only disappeared for an hour, and he was gone for 3 days. Would I stay in Dobbin's Garden by myself? No, I wouldn't. Right? I don't know if anybody else would, but I know I wouldn't. I believe in the legend. I believe the legend is true.
The people of Bell Island take these local legends and folklore very seriously, and visitors would be wise to heed their warnings before venturing into the area's forests and marshes after dark. At Fort McLeod, Alberta's Empress Theater, an actress studied her script in the balcony. Believing she was alone in the building, she was surprised to hear footsteps coming from the first floor. Cautiously, she approached the stairs, wondering who else could be around. As she looked down, the footsteps abruptly stopped, and there was nobody in sight. Suddenly, something pushed her. When she recovered, she looked up, but there was nobody there. Once again, the theater was quiet. Shaken but unharmed, she wondered if anyone was ever really alone at the Empress Theater.
The world of the theater is one of great dedication, commitment, and sacrifice. Many, whether they are actors, technicians, or managers, find the Playhouse more of a real home than their own. It should not come as a surprise that some of them chose to linger on after death. The Empress Theater in Fort Macleod, Alberta, is a perfect example of this undying love for the stage.
The Empress Theater was built in 1912 and opened in 1912. The Empress Theater is the oldest theater of its kind in Alberta. It was during the 1980s, during the heyday of the Great West Summer Repertory Theater, and around the time of the restoration of the Empress Theater in 1988-89, that reports of a ghost began to surface. Most of the reports concentrate around times where the theater was in trouble, either financially or physically. There was a time where the theater was in threat of being shut down, and there were more reports at that time.
During one financial crisis, the Empress almost closed its doors permanently. A staff member sadly packed some of her personal items. She thought she heard footsteps in the empty theater, but could not trace them. Then she smelled cigar smoke wafting up from the basement. She cautiously made her way down to the dressing room. It was empty. But the smell of cigar smoke still lingered.
Of course, all these reports are accompanied with distinct smells of tobacco. So this developed into the ghost being named Ed because of this character who worked here at the Empress Theater.
During the Prohibition era, a technician named Ed worked at the theater. He loved the exciting atmosphere there and considered it his second home. He also loved music, cigars, and liquor, and ran a profitable bootlegging operation on the side. But Ed had a falling out with some of the gangsters he supplied and was stabbed to death in the basement of the Empress. From that day on, Ed's second home seems to have become his eternal one.
Reports of musicians and performers being on stage and seeing a man in the far back corner of the balcony sitting there night after night, and of course not being identified.
A local pianist was performing her recital at the theater. As she made her way through a difficult piece, she was shocked to see a man standing on stage with her. He stared at her coldly. Being a professional, she continued playing, but was very shaken. When she finished the piece, the mysterious man was gone. She left the stage disappointed, feeling her performance had been ruined by the appearance of this mysterious figure. She explained what had occurred to the stage manager, wondering how he could have allowed this to happen. He went to investigate when he saw a shadowy figure standing in the balcony. The man vanished. He had enough and left whatever was in the balcony in peace. The most unusual encounter with Ed happened at the box office. Patrons began entering the theater before the house opened, claiming a gentleman in the box office had sold them their tickets. An usher reported the strange incident to the manager, and the two rushed upstairs to see what was going on. When they arrived at the box office, the man had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the ticket stubs and the customer's change. Even more mysterious was that there were no men on the staff that night. Many speculate that Ed decided to lend a hand that evening.
If we have a resident ghost, then I think that completes the picture. We're actually quite pleased that we have someone here who enjoys the theater from the other side.
Ed's love of the Empress Theater may have carried over beyond death, and perhaps during times of trouble, he returns to help ease the burden on the theater's staff by reminding them that, like him, this legendary place will never really die. For one terrifying week in 1903, few dared to venture out of their homes after dark in Wilno, Ontario. An unspeakable evil had begun to prey on the town, something that these Polish immigrants believed existed only in legends. No one was safe. The townspeople knew that the most terrifying of legends had come to their village. There was a vampire in their midst.
Most consider vampires to be the stuff of legends. Legends brought to Canada by early European settlers. At the beginning of the 20th century, folklore and fact collided in the Polish village of Wilno, Ontario, where many claim a wave of vampire attacks shattered the small community.
The legend of the Wilno vampire began with what should have been a joyous time. A newlywed couple was looking forward to a long life together. The young groom had immigrated from Poland and had used every cent he had to purchase a small piece of land for him and his wife. As farmers, he hoped their lives would be happy but humble. Unfortunately, the young bride was suffering from what is now known as clinical depression, a condition which tormented her, pushing her to the depths of suicidal despair. Soon, this sadness became the only emotion she could feel, and eventually she could stand no more. As a devout Christian, she knew suicide was a grievous sin, punishable by eternal damnation. But her living hell was far more difficult to endure. She walked out into the lake that bordered their farm and took her own life. Her husband made the horrifying discovery. He could not bear the thought of burying her in unconsecrated ground, the fate of any suicide. So he claimed that she had drowned accidentally. Little did he know, his lie would have devastating consequences. Her body was laid out in the village cemetery chapel before burial, allowing family members to come from hundreds of miles away for the viewing. A few nights later, the dead woman's cousin felt compelled to visit her relative one last time. According to Polish folklore, a suicide victim laid to rest on hallowed ground will become a vampire who feeds on the blood of its own family. As the young cousin entered the chapel, she was shocked to find the casket empty. Suddenly, her cousin appeared standing before her. As the dead woman stared back at her relative, the young cousin became entranced by her gaze, terrified but unable to move or look away. The young girl was never seen again, but she was only the beginning. The vampire's youngest sister was her next victim. Prayers were written on paper and placed in the little girl's mouth in an attempt to keep her from becoming one of the undead. Knowing he was responsible for the family's suffering, the desperate young husband decided to make amends. His mission was a sad and painful one, but he knew what had to be done. He had studied the folklore of his native Poland and had discovered a way to put an end to this curse. He approached the chapel where his wife's body was laid out peacefully. She looked like she was merely asleep. The one sure method of killing a vampire was to slice off its head during daylight while it slept. The young man gathered his courage. For a moment, he hesitated. The head was placed at the vampire's feet, finally freeing his wife from her curse. The young man confessed what he had done, and he was tried for desecrating the chapel and the body. A jury of townspeople found him not guilty, arguing that he had done what was necessary to rid the village of evil. The body of the alleged vampire was cremated, leaving only a legend behind. Today, vampires are rarely spoken of in Wilno, except to deny their existence. But something unspeakable did happen in this quaint Ontario village, and the legend, like the vampires themselves, live on forever. There is an inn at Niagara-on-the-Lake that flies the British flag 24 hours a day, even though the owners are not English. At the Old Angel Inn, the Union Jack flies for a very different reason. A tourist visited Niagara-on-the-Lake during the American Independence Day weekend. She loved the old-world charm of the town. It made her feel as if she had traveled back in time. After a day of sightseeing, she returned to the Old Angel Inn, where she was staying for the night. Among the various souvenirs she had picked up was an American flag, which she draped over an end table before settling down for a quiet night's sleep. But it would not be as peaceful as she had hoped. She awoke with the sensation that something was in the room with her. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of an angry face staring back at her. She turned and was confronted by a man in a red military uniform. He stared at her disdainfully and vanished. Shocked by the experience, she decided to speak to the managers. As she left the room, she noticed something on the hallway floor. Lying there was the American flag that had been in her room only moments before. She glanced up and again saw the uniformed man staring at her disapprovingly. Or was it the object in her hands that he so despised?
Walking down a street in Ontario's Niagara-on-the-Lake, one could easily forget that it was once a battlefield, burnt to the ground in the War of 1812. It has been called the most haunted city in Ontario. Among its many ghosts is Captain Swayze, a permanent resident of the Old Angel Inn.
Many believe that the ghost that haunts the Old Angel Inn is that of Captain Swayze, a noble British soldier stationed at Niagara-on-the-Lake during the War of 1812. But he was conflicted. On the one hand, he was in love with a local Canadian woman and was to meet her at the inn so he could guarantee her safe passage across enemy lines. On the other hand, duty called. He was carrying confidential documents vital to the war effort. Would he protect his love or deliver the documents? He chose the girl. When she failed to arrive at their rendezvous spot, it was already too late for him to reach the retreating British forces. With the information he carried, he knew he would not be safe. It is said that he then rushed into the basement of the Old Angel Inn to either conceal or destroy the documents, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. But he had been followed. The American soldiers cornered him in the basement, where he was savagely beaten to death. These agonizing final moments of Swayze's life may be what has trapped his spirit at the Old Angel Inn. Could it be that this brutal act by the invading U.S. soldiers has forever embittered him against all things American?
There are certainly a few smaller incidents that do happen at the Angel from time to time. Lots of glasses falling off shelves, things moving around. Footsteps are very commonly heard in the building when there should be none.
The ghost at the Old Angel Inn is not a belligerent or aggressive spirit unless he is provoked. One American tourist who heard the legend decided it would be funny to intentionally antagonize the spirit. He began to make anti-British comments, some directly relating to the War of 1812. The spirit did not find his antics amusing. The tourist was suddenly pushed from his stool as if some invisible hand had shoved him. Looking up from the floor, he saw a translucent figure in a red uniform staring down at him. This American tourist and his opinions were quickly bound for the border.
Should also tell you about the British flag, which we fly over the Angel here, over the front door and the side door as well. We fly the British flag, the old Union Jack, to calm our ghost, so to speak. The legend says he remains harmless as long as we fly the flag, so we never take it down ever.
The Old Angel Inn's Captain Swayze is one of Canada's most famous and enduring ghosts. His legendary dislike of Americans seems to have subsided somewhat. However, one might want to give careful consideration to their words in this phantom's realm here at the Old Angel Inn. There is a small hill on King Road in rural Burlington, Ontario, that is believed to have an unusual magnetic attraction. Unaware of the area's supernatural reputation, a father and son were surprised to experience this strange phenomenon firsthand. Driving down the road, they realized they had made a wrong turn. As a result, they were lost. The father pulled the car over, put it in neutral, and asked his son to hand him a map. While the father was studying the map, his son noticed their car was mysteriously being pulled forward, up the hill.
Dad, we're moving!
The two lost travelers were confused, but astounded by what they had just witnessed. The father took control of the car and stopped at the top of the hill. They got out and inspected the vehicle. Neither father nor son could explain how or what had just happened. They returned to the vehicle, baffled by their experience. Slightly shaken, the two drove off, leaving behind the strange phenomenon known as Magnetic Hill.
In Burlington, Ontario, there is a peculiar hill which seems to defy gravity. It mysteriously pulls cars up to its peak, and people flock there hoping to experience the unusual phenomena. But it would seem that we are not alone in our fascination, and that magnetic attraction is not the only unexplained mystery on Magnetic Hill.
We have taken 3 different cars out there, stop at the bottom of the hill, or what appears to be the bottom, put the car in neutral, shut it off, and it will roll up the hill to the tree. There is a legend that goes along with it. Many years ago, a school bus filled with children went out of control and crashed into the willow tree. And it is said, when the car stops at the bottom of the hill, the children from that school bus will push it up the hill to the willow tree where they died. Some say that if you sprinkle your bumper with baby powder, that when it goes to the top of the hill, if you get out and inspect your bumper, you will find child-sized handprints in the powder.
Many strange occurrences take place on Magnetic Hill. Traffic records show this hill has been the site of many accidents. Perhaps that explains why ghostly apparitions make regular appearances on King Road. One story tells of a young man who was driving home late at night after completing his shift at work. He was tired, but just wanted to make it home. Sadly, his fatigue would be the cause of his demise. The young man lost control of his car and crashed, killing himself instantly. Some theories maintain that the hill's magnetic pull is generally harmless. However, others believe that its strength can fluctuate, causing vehicles to lose control. Some believe that this victim has returned after death to the site of his horrible accident and is now a restless soul, eternally roaming this road. A woman ran into car trouble on this very road, underestimating the amount of fuel needed to get to her destination. With jerry can in hand, she began a long journey to the next gas station. Seeing a young man in the distance, she hailed him, hoping he would help her. The man ignored her and walked away. Disappointed, she continued on alone in her search for gas. As she walked along, lost in her thoughts, the same man suddenly appeared in front of her. She was startled. The young woman was frightened and confused. She ran in fear for her life. Although most eyewitnesses describe seeing the ghost of a young man, no one is sure exactly how many spirits haunt King Road. On top of cars being pulled uphill and ghosts haunting rural highways, King Road is also famous for one more mysterious occurrence.
There have been claims that there have been UFOs spotted from that location. So far, we have only gotten orbs on film, but we are hopeful that we will capture more.
An amateur video enthusiast came to the clearing just behind Magnetic Hill in order to experiment with night exposure. A light appeared and traveled across the sky. Then, in an instant, it was gone. The photographer was confused, not exactly sure what he had seen. He left the site, planning to give the images he had captured a closer look. Some speculate that UFOs are attracted to the area because of this magnetic quality, which acts as a navigational point for extraterrestrial travelers. Why Burlington? And why this hill? Visitors and paranormal researchers continue trying to answer these questions. What they do know, however, is that this place in Ontario is the only location in the world known to contain such varied and potentially terrifying paranormal activities. This historic building in northern Ontario has a great deal of history. However, history is not the only thing lingering within its walls. One day, as a staff member entered the house, an uneasy feeling came over her. As the employee walked from room to room, she grew more and more uncomfortable. The appearance of an apparition stopped her dead in her tracks. This unsuspecting employee had come face to face with the resident spirit of the Mathers Walls House.
In Kenora, Ontario, a building was erected for the employees of the local sawmill. One can only begin to imagine the hardships these people faced in this wild and rural part of Canada. Today, Mathers Walls is vacant, except for an occasional tour group and the odd spirit passing through its rooms.
This is the Mather Walls house, and some people believe that it is in fact haunted.
As early as the 16th century, settlers began making their homes in northern Ontario. In the area now known as Kenora, prominent Ottawa businessman John Mathers set out to make his dream a reality. Mathers developed a 200-acre site for his sawmill. He also built a residential house for the mill's employees, now called the Mathers Walls House. Over its many years, this home has played silent witness to great joy and tremendous sorrow. The early 1900s were the most difficult years. Spanish influenza ran rampant through this small community. It is believed that during one of these epidemics, an employee's wife contracted the devastating flu. But so little could be done for those who were sick. The woman's husband held her hand, comforting her as best he could. The cold, damp rag he used to cool her brow did little to ease her pain. eventually she succumbed to the disease. He had lost the love of his life. His sadness overwhelmed him, and he knew there was only one way to end his suffering. Naively believing he would be reunited with his wife in heaven, he took his own life.
He was so distraught that he went to his family cabin and committed suicide. Now, at that time, the family locked up his room, and it wasn't open for like 50 years, and it wasn't open until 75, and just it's like a time warp. When they opened the room, it hadn't changed in all that time.
However, it seems instead of the hoped-for reunion, his spirit still remains bound to this house. While on a tour of the Mathers Walls house, a woman stopped to admire a picture on the wall. The guide left the tourist to explore and enjoy the house on her own. The tourist was distracted when, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something moving. Turning, she saw a spirit sitting at the head of the table. For a moment, the visitor froze, then slowly backed away, attempting not to disturb this ghost. The woman ran out the front door to tell the tour guide what she had seen. The guide then told the visitor that she too had an experience with the resident ghost, and that the spirit seemed friendly. She assured her there was nothing to worry about.
Things tend to move every now and then, go missing. Chairs have sort of moved themselves in the room without anyone being there.
Like many old houses, maintenance is required, and in 1984, the Mathers Walls underwent an extensive interior restoration. During the restoration, a painter was hired to repaint one of the rooms. He began to set up, laying a worksheet out on the floor and preparing his tools. As he did so, he heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Initially, his search for the source of the footsteps was fruitless, and then, upon re-entering the room where he had been working, he was confronted by the resident spirit. The painter left, vowing he would never return to the house again. Ontario's Mathers Walls has had hundreds of inhabitants, and the lives of many who lived there were filled with hardship and sorrow. While it comes as no surprise that a spirit seems eternally bound to this place, it makes it no less terrifying for the visitor when confronted by this ghost.